Breath of Fire 3 for PlayStation was a special game to me when I was around 10 years old. It was my go-to rental from Blockbuster, and it was one of the few games that I can recall being returned with the game manual still in great condition. I wonder today if that means I was one of the few people to rent it. This is a video in a series of classic retro gaming retrospectives where I give it my CRT review. I'll be diving a bit into the game's history, development, gameplay, and innovation, and then give it a final grade based on my subjective 5 out of 5 for charm, replay, and technique. If you like this video or want to stay tuned for my future planned retrospectives, please subscribe. It really helps new channels like myself out a lot. I appreciate it. Okay, with that out of the way, let's take a look back at Breath of Fire 3. Developed and published by Capcom, Breath of Fire 3 was released in Japan on September 11, 1997, and in North America on May 18, 1998. Europe saw an early fall release later that year in October 1998. The game saw a re-release on PlayStation Portable in Japan on August 3, 2005, and in Europe on February 3, 2006. It was then an entire decade before seeing its most recent release on the PlayStation Network on February 9, 2016. The team that worked on the previous two Breath of Fire titles were used to the strict limitations of the Super Nintendo, and the upgrade in processing and system memory of the PlayStation hardware allowed them to add substantially more dialogue text and even some voice acting. With the increase in hardware capability also came the potential challenges, as they were also faced with the task of incorporating 3D graphics into their game world. 3D graphics were by far a necessity by this point, especially with a different, slightly lesser known game having been released a year and a half before. Art director Tetsuya Yoshikawa had worked on the previous two games in the series, and he returns here, lending his style to beautiful hand-drawn 2D sprites. The game uses three-dimensional graphics for the buildings, scenery, and other play area objects, and the team at Capcom did an amazing job blending the original 2D art style of the earlier games with the new environment. The 2D sprites are colorful and full of emotion and movement. Environmental pans and idle animations are on point, showing off the true capabilities of the hardware. The world map is also displayed using 3D polygons, which sometimes can feel a little odd, considering the world map does contain a handful of loading areas. But this shows you the extent the team was willing to go to push the limits of the hardware. Overall, the game has plenty of heart and unique style when it comes to art direction. Breath of Fire 3's music was composed by two members of Capcom's sound team, Hikari Keita serving as the game's lead composer and Yoshina Aoki in a support role. While the music was initially intended to be orchestral, Keita decided that a pop-jazz hybrid soundtrack was a better complement to the game's colorful visuals. I find the jazz style interesting and fresh, especially for a JRPG, and I think it meshes well with the game's themes of improv and organic flow. The track The Game Never Ends has a jazzy piano and bass line that make it feel like people are playing in the very next room. There are also some peaceful and lovely ballads, such as Spoiled by Regret. My favorite song is the song played in the credits called Pure Again. It's funky and has lyrics. It's great. Overall, the game has plenty of heart when it comes to the art and music. But how does the story hold up? Breath of Fire 1 and 2 writer Makoto Ikehara stepped into the directorial role for this entry. As he wrote the story, he considered the themes of independence and thinking for yourself. As the team built the story outline, they were open to taking suggestions and including them into the story, even if they didn't directly fit the narrative. This helps the story feel grounded and organically connected to the series' heart. However, this decision could also be a reason why the pace of the story can sometimes feel pretty slow, and sometimes a little confusing. The story begins with a pair of miners unearthing what appears to be a baby dragon trapped inside a crystal. After releasing it, it eventually escapes and is knocked unconscious. It transforms back into a young boy, where they're found by Ray, a member of a cat-like tribe. From there, Ray and his accomplice, Tipo, go on to care for the boy, and eventually discover his name is Ryu, which also happens to be the name of the protagonist of the first two games. This is one of a few loose threads and themes that this game has in ties with its parent games, a trope that many JRPGs are known for. While Breath of Fire 2 took place 500 years after Breath of Fire 1, the third entry is all but confirmed to take place in an alternate timeline. Eventually, Ryu discovers he is part of an ancient race called the Brood, who are hunted toward extinction. Further events transpire, and we meet a few pretty memorable characters. Along with Ray, there's Nina, the Princess of Windia, Momo, a scientist studying the magical ore known as Chrism, Peko, a mutated plant that looks kinda like an overgrown onion, and Gar, a warrior with a history. Ultimately, when it comes to the flow of the overall game, I have to admit, it was a very slow burn. It wasn't until about halfway through, or about 16 hours or so, that it really sunk its teeth into me, and after that, I was gripped. Your mileage may vary, and fortunately, there was still plenty to do and see at that point. This aspect may improve for you a bit once you further understand the battle systems, and some of the fun outside of the battle mechanics that the series introduces here. Exploration in the world map and the local environments are strongly encouraged in Breath of Fire 3. Outside of battle, the camera can be tilted by holding down the R1 button and using left or right on the D-pad. This mechanic is vital to finding hidden treasure, doorways, and even NPCs. Upon a replay, the camera system can feel unintuitive and disorienting, and it certainly shows its age. However, it ended up growing on me and feeling comfortable again as I went along. While traversing the world map, occasional drop-in points appear, designated by a question mark or an exclamation point. These can end up being specific story zones or random exploration zones where the player can grind or search for random dropped loot. The player can also stop to rest and save at a camp from the world map, where they can speak with other party members around the campfire, an obvious nod to Dragon Quest's zone rapport building. Breath of Fire 3 needed a way to differentiate its battle mechanics from the ever-increasingly popular list of JRPGs that had begun to sell well in the West during the late 90s. And two of those systems are found in this game's use of dragon genes, as well as its mastering systems. Masters are characters found within the world that will lend their hand in making one of your characters their apprentice after meeting certain criteria. Apprenticing under a master will yield the chosen character with certain stat boosts at level up. Unique skills can also be learned by visiting the master after reaching a set amount of levels. Masters should be selected wisely, since while they boost the rate of certain stats increases, they decrease the rate for other stats as a way of trade-off. While it may not sound very innovative compared to modern standards, the goal of the Master System was to allow players to have a feeling of control over the growth of their party's stats, in a way that the Esper and Materia systems did for Final Fantasy VI and VII respectively. And I feel the mechanic was handled well here. In fact, fans seemed to enjoy it too, and eventually found its way into Breath of Fire 4 as well. Dragon transformation as a theme is a large aspect of the Breath of Fire series, and the Dragon Gene system is this game's variation on that. After unlocking the ability to transform, Ryu can collect Dragon Genes throughout the story, or discovered as large purple crystals within the game world. During battle, the player can then combine up to 3 genes using Ryu's Accession skill, which will transform him into one of a handful of different dragons, each with their own battle usefulness and stats. The Warrior Dragon, for instance, is created using the Force gene, and while they have a high attack rating, they're a bit of a glass cannon. The Dragon system is a fun way to discover new skills for you in battle, and by utilizing their gameplay and unique skills, it provides the player with another option for turning the tide, which is something you will desperately need. There's no use getting around it. Breath of Fire 3 is a fairly difficult game. Many early JRPGs were inspired by the Dragon Warrior series, known as Dragon Quest in the US, which is well known for their heavy grinding. This game is no exception. It also tends to lean into being very secretive and gatekeepy with its weapons and items, especially early in the game. In order to purchase better weapon sets, you'll find yourself grinding for Zenny, resting at a camp, grinding for some more Zenny, rinse and repeat. Additionally, to keep pace with obtaining some of the best equipment as you progress, you will need to explore every corner of the dungeon. Dungeons, while often short in scope, are often convoluted and obfuscated by loosely constructed puzzles. Solutions are either blatantly simple or often rely on trial and error, combined with traversal to one location and back to another, which ultimately feels like this game's take on a fetch quest. In fact, something that I learned upon my research for this video was that there was feedback that the player movement was too slow in the original Breath of Fire games. To make up for this, the designers added the ability to sprint while holding down a button. However, while running, the enemy encounter rate is increased significantly. It seems time killing is on Breath of Fire 3's mind, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you enjoy the usual JRPG grind. But overall, the grind here feels different and unique enough, interspersed with just enough exploration and item searching for it not to feel unwarranted. There's also the fishing minigame, which is a time killer in its own right. Because of all this, I believe Breath of Fire 3 would be a perfect candidate for a modern 2D HD remaster, something in the vein of Octopath Traveler or the recent Dragon Quest III remake. With a few thoughtful quality of life improvements, such as a fast forward option or reduced encounter rates, I could easily see its replay value rising significantly. As it stands though, it's hard to recommend revisiting the game purely for replay purposes. That said, if you've never experienced it before, it absolutely deserves a first playthrough. As mentioned, the team was limited by the Super Nintendo hardware when they developed the earlier Breath of Fire games. Because of this, both of those games were full of abbreviated player names, skill names, magic, item, and equipment names, all of which led to plenty of confusion. The PlayStation was a massive leap forward in this regard, however, perhaps old habits truly are hard to break, and this may unfortunately be the case in Breath of Fire 3 as well. I find the issue most prevalent in the UI and menuing systems. The UI and item names still have minimal abbreviations, and while I can understand that this is certainly a step forward in terms of processing a database of items, I'm not unconvinced that the decision here might be an entirely lateral move, especially when considering the player now has to do a small, while relatively simple, word problem each time they navigate menus or receive new items. For some people, this may be rather innocuous and a nitpick, but for me, it gets a bit exhausting. I also have to mention another small issue I noticed fairly early when it comes to replaying the game: the speed of the dialogue boxes and narration text. When starting a new game, you're asked to select a few menu options, with one of them being menu speed. I recommend this to anyone playing this game for the first time. Select fast speed. Unfortunately, even if you do select fast speed, the text speed still feels like a crawl compared to the modern pace gaming and JRPGs as a whole have achieved today. The amount of text and the text size placed in those boxes also feels very limited, even for a PlayStation game. Am I wrong about this? However, maybe this is a deliberate choice. Breath of Fire 3's story and world deserve to be seen, experienced, and understood. So, is Breath of Fire 3 a bad game? I'm not sure. I don't think it's bad, but certainly flawed. Capcom needed a way to evolve its flagship RPG and usher the Breath of Fire series into the next generation of gaming hardware while preserving the heart and spirit that defined it. The entire industry was undergoing a major transformation, transitioning from 2D to 3D, and the RPG genre was facing fierce competition from rising juggernauts like Squaresoft. All things considered, Breath of Fire 3 accomplished far more for the genre than it's often given credit for today. Capcom had truly captured lightning in a bottle. I remember loving it back then, the unique blend of 2D anime art style with 3D polygons, the way the characters interacted with each other in the world, and how the story unfolded. It all felt so organic to me, and it still does. I do remember being frustrated with certain aspects of it back then, and unfortunately due to my years of experience with other games, I can't help but notice the areas in which this entry is flawed and dated. As for its charm, I feel it holds up very well, with its memorable characters, colorful art style, unique jazz-infused soundtrack, as well as an organically unfolding story. 4.5 out of 5. For its replay, it's admittedly a little bland. This was in a time before New Game Plus and many quality of life features that are commonplace today. For what it is, the game is obviously dated and struggles to stand out as a bona fide classic per se, so I have to give the replay a 2 out of 5. For the game's technique, while it does have its flaws, I feel that the game does serve as an excellent addition to any JRPG's lover's backlog. Those who understand what that means won't be disappointed. 4.5 out of 5. If you haven't experienced the Breath of Fire series before, I think this entry makes a great starting point and serves as a great foundation for the series that doesn't get enough love. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to 1218 Studios to stay tuned for my future retro reviews.
Passes. If we make it to the